From the very first moment I imagined my life, I pictured a home filled with love, laughter, and security. I had always been the kind of woman who believed in dreams, in building a life that others would envy, yet secretly admire for its warmth and authenticity. Every morning, I would wake up in our sunlit bedroom, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air, and watch Adriel move around the kitchen with the ease of a man who had everything he wanted and more. He was charming, successful, and, to the world, completely devoted to me. Friends often remarked that we were the perfect couple, and I let their admiration reassure me that I had made the right choices, that I had chosen well when I had chosen him. Yet beneath that glittering surface, the calm that I had taken for granted was fragile and deceptive, a thin glass that could shatter with the slightest pressure. Life was not without its trials, but they were manageable, navigable. I had a steady career that I loved, colleagues who supported and challenged me in equal measure, and a family that remained close despite distance and time. Adriel had always been generous, at least in ways that mattered to the public eye. He attended every family gathering, smiled for every photograph, and whispered words of affection that felt genuine, if occasionally rehearsed. I had chosen to overlook the small inconveniences, the fleeting doubts that crept into my mind when I noticed his distracted moments, the lingering glances at someone else, perhaps just in passing, that made me tense. I told myself that love required trust, patience, and forgiveness, and I clung to those principles like lifelines, believing them to be unbreakable truths. It was during the spring that everything changed, when the sunlight that once seemed to warm me now felt like an accusation. I returned home one evening earlier than usual, my day having ended sooner than expected, my mind brimming with minor victories at work that I had longed to share with him. The door to our apartment was slightly ajar, and a peculiar unease crawled up my spine. The air smelled different, floral yet heavy with tension. I called his name, my voice steady but uncertain, and footsteps answered from the living room. What I saw next is etched into my memory with unforgiving clarity. Adriel was not alone. He was laughing, leaning close to a woman I had never seen before, her presence unfamiliar yet immediately intrusive, like an unwelcome shadow that consumed the light in the room. My heart faltered. My breath caught. Every instinct screamed that the life I had believed to be mine, the carefully constructed reality I had trusted, was now unraveling before my eyes. The betrayal was a blade that cut deeper than I had ever imagined. Adriel, the man who had promised me fidelity, whispered words to this other woman, words that had once been reserved for me, laden with intimacy and secret joy. I felt an internal storm surge, a mix of fury, heartbreak, and disbelief. How could the man I had given my trust, my time, my dreams to abandon them so carelessly? The woman smiled, unaware that she had just stepped into the shattered fragments of my life, and Adriel laughed in a way that once made my heart flutter, but now sounded hollow, almost cruel. I retreated silently, needing a moment to breathe, to understand how reality had twisted so violently. The betrayal was not just in his actions, but in the choices he had made. The life he had offered someone else while pretending all along that ours was a sanctuary of loyalty and love. For days I struggled with the storm inside me. Every memory of our years together now carried a shadow, every conversation a hidden meaning, every touch a reminder of what had been stolen. I found myself questioning not only him but also myself. Had I been blind, naive, too trusting in a world that demanded vigilance and suspicion? Friends offered condolences, their voices gentle yet piercing in their truth. They reminded me that I deserved better, that the pain was not a reflection of my weakness but of his deceit. Yet knowing this did little to quiet the raw ache of betrayal. The dreams I had built were not just disrupted, they were taken, appropriated by someone else, someone who now held pieces of the life I had envisioned for myself. I realized that if I was to reclaim any part of my peace, my dignity, or my future, I could not remain passive. The choice to act, to rise from the ashes of my heartbreak, was mine alone. And so, with a trembling hand and a resolute heart, I began to consider what it truly meant to take back the life that had been promised to someone else. A life that should have been mine from the start. The first days after that evening were the hardest. I moved through my apartment like a ghost, performing the motions of life without truly feeling them. Each object, each corner, each familiar scent now carried the weight of his betrayal. Even the walls seemed to whisper secrets I wasn't meant to hear, their silence taunting me with memories of laughter that had once felt secure. I began noticing the small cracks I had once ignored, the subtle signs of his divided attention, and the things I had excused as harmless distractions now looked like deliberate omissions. The reality was undeniable. Adriel had chosen someone else, someone new, over the life we had built together, and I could no longer pretend that ignorance was bliss. That realization was suffocating, yet it sparked a fire inside me, a determination I hadn't realized I possessed. I was not a woman who would crumble quietly while my life was dismantled before my eyes. Work became both a refuge and a battlefield. I immersed myself in projects, meetings, and deadlines, forcing my mind to concentrate on the tasks at hand. Colleagues noticed the change in my demeanor, commenting on the sharpness in my decisions, the intensity in my focus. Yet beneath the surface, the questions never ceased. How had I been so blind? How could someone so close to me live a double life without me realizing it? I knew that asking for sympathy would achieve nothing. The truth, no matter how painful, demanded action. I started documenting details, little things I had overheard or observed, dates, times, snippets of conversations. At first, it felt obsessive, almost obsessive-compulsive. But then I recognized it as the first step toward regaining control. Knowledge was power, and if I was to reclaim the life that had been stolen from me, I needed to understand everything, leave nothing to chance. Friends became lifelines during this period of chaos. Marissa, my closest friend since college, insisted on regular coffee dates where I poured out my thoughts, my doubts, my rage. She never judged, never tried to soften the edges of my anger. Instead, she validated it, reminding me that I had been wronged and that it was natural to feel the weight of injustice. Her support was unwavering, a steady current beneath the storm, and through our conversations, I began to map out a path forward. It was not merely about confronting Adriel. It was about reclaiming my identity, my sense of worth, and my autonomy. I realized that my strength had not vanished. It had been lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to rise, waiting for the betrayal to awaken it fully. The clarity was intoxicating, even in the midst of heartbreak. I also had to confront the practical realities. Living in the same city, running into the traces of him, the glimpses of her presence in our shared social circles, made each day an emotional minefield. I navigated these encounters with deliberate composure, hiding the turmoil inside while keeping my mind sharply focused on my goal. Each interaction, each overheard word, became a piece of the puzzle, revealing more about the life he had given her and the spaces where I had been erased. Anger was no longer destructive. It became a tool, a lens through which I could see the world with precise clarity. It guided my decisions, strengthened my resolve, and steeled me for the inevitable confrontation with the truth. The more I learned, the more I realized that taking back what was mine required strategy, patience, and emotional resilience. Late at night, when the world was quiet and my apartment seemed vast and empty, I allowed myself to acknowledge the pain fully. I let the tears flow freely, mourning not just the betrayal but the illusion of the life I had believed in so completely. Yet even in those dark moments, there was a quiet promise forming, a whisper that I could reclaim my destiny. Adriel had underestimated me, misjudged the depths of my determination, and assumed that my love would be enough to tether me to him despite his deceit. He had been wrong. That realization was the turning point. No longer a victim, I began to see myself as a force capable of reshaping the circumstances around me. I would not let his betrayal define me. I would take back the life he had given her, not out of spite alone, but out of a reclamation of the identity and the future that was always rightfully mine. As the weeks passed, my plan became clearer. It was not hasty. It was calculated. I would need allies, information, and the patience to strike at the right moment. I resolved to balance the outward semblance of normalcy with the meticulous gathering of the details that would empower me. Every phone call, every email, every social encounter was a potential source of insight. Adriel thought he had succeeded in erasing me, but I was rewriting the narrative, paragraph by paragraph, step by deliberate step. The awakening that began with betrayal had now transformed into purpose, and as I lay awake in the stillness of the night, I allowed myself a quiet smile. The life he had handed to another would return to me, not because of luck or chance, but because I had awakened to my own strength, and no one and not even Adriel could take that away. The first step in reclaiming what was rightfully mine was observation. I started frequenting places I knew Adriel and her would visit, careful to blend in as a neutral observer rather than someone seeking confrontation. Every detail mattered: the way he laughed, the little gestures that revealed intimacy, the subtle adjustments in her behavior when she thought no one was watching. I noted patterns, memorized routines, and cataloged every morsel of information that could serve my purpose. It was not about obsession anymore. It was about understanding the mechanisms of their life so that I could dismantle the illusion and reconstruct it in a way that reflected the truth. My resolve sharpened with each revelation, the fire inside me growing hotter, fueled by the knowledge of what had been stolen. Adriel believed he had won, but he was blind to the force that had begun to emerge: a woman who had been underestimated, whose heart had been betrayed but whose spirit refused to break. Parallel to this, I began strengthening my own life outside of the battlefield of observation and information gathering. I returned to passions I had neglected: painting, running, writing. Each stroke of the brush, each mile run, each word written became a reclaiming of identity, a reminder that I was more than the betrayal I had endured. Friends who had drifted away found their way back, drawn to the renewed energy radiating from me. I accepted their support but made it clear that the steps I was taking were deliberate and non-negotiable. No one could move me from the path I had chosen, and the clarity of purpose that had emerged from the ashes of heartbreak guided my actions. This dual life, one of outward normalcy, the other of meticulous planning, was exhausting, yet invigorating. It reminded me that strength often manifests not in the absence of struggle, but in the way we navigate through it. At work, subtle changes began to take shape in my favor. Projects that once stalled under ambiguous approval now moved forward under my leadership. Colleagues who had doubted my resolve recognized the new edge in my demeanor, the precision in my strategy, and even Adriel's acquaintances started noticing the quiet transformation. It was a silent assertion of presence, a reminder that I had not disappeared into heartbreak, but had emerged stronger, wiser, and more formidable. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced my belief that reclaiming my life was not just an emotional need, but a tangible goal. I began envisioning the moment when I would confront him, not with explosive anger, but with the calm certainty of someone who had rebuilt herself from the ground up, piece by piece, detail by detail. The most challenging part, however, was mastering my own emotions. Anger and sadness were natural responses, yet they threatened to cloud judgment. I had to channel them constructively, using them to fuel determination rather than letting them lead to rash decisions. Meditation, journaling, and long walks helped me process the emotional weight, allowing me to separate the man who had betrayed me from the strategy I was executing. Adriel was no longer the center of my universe. He was an obstacle, a catalyst for transformation, and a mirror reflecting the strength I had always possessed, but had allowed to be buried. This mental clarity was as important as any concrete plan because without it, even the best-laid schemes could falter under the pressure of unbridled emotion. Then came the subtle, almost imperceptible shifts in his behavior that confirmed my suspicions: complacency, overconfidence, and underestimation. Adriel was oblivious to the depth of the awakening he had triggered. He assumed I would crumble quietly, perhaps even fade away, leaving his new life undisturbed. Instead, I had become a presence he could not ignore, a force growing in the background, invisible yet inescapable. I began to see patterns in his communication, his schedules, and the way he navigated social spaces. Every misstep, every reveal, no matter how minor, became ammunition in the meticulous architecture of my return. The pieces were aligning, and the structure of his life, built on deceit, was beginning to show the first signs of vulnerability. Patience had become my ally, precision my weapon, and awareness my shield. The awakening that began with betrayal was now a deliberate, strategic force poised to reclaim everything that had been unjustly taken. Through this process, I also recognized the importance of reclaiming my narrative publicly and privately. I would no longer allow my story to be dictated by Adriel or by anyone else who sought to diminish my worth. Conversations with friends, colleagues, and even casual acquaintances were handled with careful intent, ensuring that my presence, my strength, and my integrity were visible without revealing the full extent of the plan. This was about perception as much as action, for to reclaim the life he had given to someone else, I needed the world to recognize that my absence was only temporary, and that my return would be calculated, undeniable, and ultimately transformative. With each passing day, I grew more adept at balancing these dimensions of strategy, presence, and emotion, moving closer to the moment when the culmination of patience, observation, and inner strength would manifest in a confrontation that was both inevitable and inevitable in its justice. The first tangible breakthrough arrived unexpectedly, as these moments often do when patience is matched with preparation. I discovered a small but significant flaw in the arrangement of their life, a neglected financial document that Adriel had assumed I would overlook. While he had been busy flaunting victories and nurturing the illusion of security with her, a critical oversight had occurred, leaving a crack in the foundation of his carefully constructed world. I did not celebrate. Instead, I quietly collected the information, cross-referencing with my own legal counsel to ensure that every move I planned was airtight. There was no room for error, no margin for impulsiveness, only precision and the disciplined application of every resource at my disposal. This discovery became a symbol reminder that even those who think they are untouchable have weaknesses, and that the process of reclaiming power begins by recognizing and leveraging them. As the days passed, I started to assert influence in subtle but undeniable ways. In social gatherings, in professional circles, in exchanges that seemed mundane to outsiders, I left hints of presence, evidence that I had not vanished into despair. People noticed the shift, the renewed confidence, the unwavering gaze that suggested a story untold but deeply understood. Adriel began to sense this, though he could not pinpoint the source, attributing it to coincidence or fleeting luck. Yet I knew that perception was as critical as action. By demonstrating strength quietly and deliberately, I was reshaping the narrative, creating an atmosphere where he began to question the control he thought he possessed. Every interaction, every carefully worded statement, contributed to the building of momentum that would, in time, culminate in an undeniable confrontation. The emotional complexity of this stage was immense. I felt moments of exhilaration mixed with the gravity of consequence. Each strategic move was a reminder of what had been lost, but also of what could be regained, not only materially, but in self-respect, autonomy, and the reclamation of identity. I often confronted memories that threatened to destabilize my resolve, the intimate moments shared, the trust placed, the promises made. Yet, rather than weakening me, they were transformed into fuel, energizing my determination to emerge not only victorious, but whole. In private reflections, I allowed myself fleeting sadness, a nod to the pain endured, but it never lingered. Pain had a purpose now, a direction, a roadmap guiding me toward the fulfillment of my journey. Emotional awareness became a tool, sharpened by experience and tempered by deliberate choice. One evening, as I reviewed my plans, I realized that the culmination was near. Adriel's overconfidence had become a liability, manifesting in careless statements, unguarded moments, and subtle lapses that I could exploit. I mapped every interaction, predicting likely responses, rehearsing contingencies, and ensuring that nothing would be left to chance. This preparation was not merely tactical. It was psychological. I understood that the ultimate impact would come not from sudden revelation alone, but from the precision of timing, the weight of context, and the inevitable confrontation of truth. The anticipation was a blend of excitement and solemnity, a recognition that the moment of reckoning was imminent and that every choice until now had been leading toward this exact juncture. Finally, the day arrived with all the inevitability of a storm. I approached the situation with calm certainty, having mastered the interplay of visibility and subtlety, timing and execution. Every word spoken, every expression revealed, every pause and emphasis was calculated to convey the full force of my awakening. Adriel, unprepared for the depth and scope of what had been set in motion, faltered in ways that confirmed the accuracy of my observations and the inevitability of the outcome. There was no shouting, no explosive confrontation. Instead, there was the quiet but unassailable assertion of presence, authority, and regained power. The life he had assumed was secure, the life he had believed untouchable, began to unravel. Not through brute force, but through the deliberate, meticulous, and emotionally resonant execution of a plan rooted in self-respect and strategic foresight. In that moment, I understood the profound truth that had guided every step. Empowerment is not granted. It is reclaimed, and the awakening of a new self is the most formidable force of all. The final moments were surreal, a convergence of anticipation, clarity, and the quiet satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly. Adriel, for all his cunning and arrogance, could not withstand the weight of the truth I presented not as a scream, not as a demand, but as the undeniable proof of presence, strategy, and resilience. The culmination of months of observation, careful maneuvering, and emotional discipline unfolded before him, and for the first time, I saw genuine uncertainty in his eyes. There was no grand spectacle, no dramatic scene of chaos. Instead, there was the slow, dawning realization that the world he had tried to dominate, the life he assumed belonged solely to him, was no longer under his control. I felt no rush of anger or desire for retaliation. What coursed through me was a calm, deep satisfaction that comes from reclaiming something that had been lost, from affirming one's worth and autonomy in a world that had sought to diminish it. In the aftermath, I reflected on the journey that had led to this awakening. The betrayal, once so searing, had become the catalyst for profound personal growth. I recognized that the sense of injustice I had carried was not only external, but internal. It was tied to self-perception, confidence, and the willingness to assert boundaries. By confronting Adriel's duplicity, I had confronted my own limits and discovered strengths I had not known resided within me. Every step taken in preparation, every moment of restraint and strategic patience, had not only shaped the outcome but had transformed me into someone more resilient, self-assured, and emotionally sovereign. The lessons were clear. Empowerment does not require destruction of others, but clarity, persistence, and belief in one's own agency. The ripple effects of the confrontation extended beyond the immediate interaction. Relationships, social circles, and professional dynamics shifted subtly but unmistakably. Friends who had doubted, colleagues who had underestimated, and family members who had watched silently were now witnesses to a transformation that commanded recognition. Respect was earned, not demanded, and it came naturally when actions aligned with integrity, intelligence, and emotional clarity. Adriel's attempts to undermine or manipulate became irrelevant, overshadowed by the undeniable presence I had established. The power I regained was not about revenge. It was about authenticity, self-assertion, and the ability to navigate life with confidence, knowing that my choices and actions were guided by purpose rather than impulse. As I moved forward, I embraced a vision of life shaped by my own decisions rather than reactions to betrayal. The experience had left scars, yes, but they were reminders of survival, adaptability, and the profound resilience of human spirit. I cultivated independence, nurtured relationships that honored mutual respect, and pursued opportunities that reflected my talents and values rather than anyone else's expectations. The past, with its pain and deceit, became a teacher rather than a chain. Adriel remained a figure in the narrative, but no longer a dominating force. His significance had diminished because I no longer granted him the power to define my experience. The awakening was complete. I was no longer defined by loss, by deception, or by the choices of others. I was defined by my own strength, clarity, and unwavering commitment to self-respect. Ultimately, the journey was less about the confrontation itself and more about the transformation it enabled. By reclaiming agency and asserting boundaries with precision and emotional intelligence, I had demonstrated that power is derived from within, that resilience is cultivated through patience and self-awareness, and that life's greatest victories are often internal rather than external. The sense of closure that followed was not a fleeting satisfaction, but a sustained understanding that I had reclaimed my narrative, my autonomy, and my dignity. In reflecting upon the path traveled, I recognized that the true measure of triumph lay not in the temporary disruption of someone else's world, but in the lasting, tangible reassertion of one's own presence, purpose, and strength. I had lost a partner, but I had found myself a revelation far more enduring, meaningful, and liberating than any act of revenge could ever be. The awakening was complete, and for the first time in years, I faced the future with unwavering confidence, unshakable self-worth, and a sense of possibility that belonged entirely to me.